when I first became aware of you, it was actually through a social media post on Instagram. I think, if I recall correctly, it was one of those things where you scroll through some reels and various other accounts come through. Yours is one of them that came out. And this was actually, if I recall correctly, less than 2 to 3 months ago, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
So the video that I'm referring to is where it was you doing some high kicks on the punching bag. But what was specific that actually caught my attention from those high kicks you were doing was that, if I recall correctly, I'm going to paraphrase here, but it was something to the effect of you hadn't done it, I think you said 17 years. And this was the first time in quite some time that you were getting back into, and you knew you were a little rusty, didn't look very good as far as the form was concerned.
I know the post that you're talking about. Yeah.
Right. So when I saw that video, I read that post is what stuck out for me the most. And then I think as time has gone by, again, you go through the feed again, and another video of you doing the kick again for another post again. And this was, I can't remember how far down the line this was as well, but I started to notice from the previous video that I remember watching of you doing those kicks, at least in this one, at least to my recollection, it looks like you gotten a little bit better. So right away, I figured out that you had been consistent with that. And I think if I recall correctly too, you kind of more or less implied there that you were still practicing, you're still working on it, and so on and so forth. So from those two posts that I remember, that's when I actually started looking to your social media to see what exactly you were more or less doing, outside of from what I saw in those posts. And then I came to find out that you were a trainer, and then you had done bodybuilding among other things as well too. But for some reason, it was really those two videos that I came across that kind of intrigued me about whether or not if you were actually doing something to kind of get back into more or less in a competitive field, if you will, because I figured that was kind of more or less what you were leaning towards. That was the impression that I got.
Okay.
Obviously, that wasn't really the case, but once I started looking into your background about trying to find some sort of interviews you may have done here recently, and I did, one that you've done not too long ago with, I think it was Talk with the Gemini podcast, if I recall.
Tales of Gemini.
Right, yes, Tales of a Gemini. Thank you. So that pretty much kind of encapsulated more or less your life in a nutshell to get an idea as far as what you had gone through your life. Then you did another one rather recently as well too.
I did.
So when I heard that conversation, there were certain areas that I was really intrigued with that I really want to delve more further with you about the areas that I thought were the best way I could describe it is that I was more interested in, because there's a certain perspective of things that you had said that were asked of you and that you had implied before about what you had gone through, that I'm wondering how a lot of those shifts had occurred for you, where you had started from your life training and where you are with yourself now. Obviously, a lot of things you have gone through more or less kind of shaped you to the person that you are now.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do my absolute best to try to condense this here, because there's a lot that I want to lead up to this that I hope you understand why I'm doing this in the first place.
No worries.
So this is what I wanted to start off with you on this. When you had described about your childhood, that you grown up, you had trained full-time because your father at the time had worked, had his business, and I think it was a sawmill business, if I recall correctly too. Is that right?
Yeah.
So his business doing well enough to the point where it afforded you the opportunity to train full-time, you to be homeschooled, and then your mother was able to more or less watch over the schedule and handle all the various things you do. Because obviously, as we already know here, that doing that in that capacity is not a very cheap thing to pull off here. So, right. So once you started going through that, it gave you the opportunity to train more or less full time, at the same time be homeschooled. But what was interesting for me about that part of the journey was that you later on in the conversation, you had said that training and being in that schedule didn't really give the opportunity for you to mess around. You had a pretty strict day-to-day routine that you had followed through to almost to a T, from what I understand. Then as time had gone by, you described before about how when you were growing up, you had grown up with a lot of guys, your brothers being a primary, well, I wouldn't say influence, but maybe just, that environment that you were in.
Okay, just wrestled at house.
Right. So then you had pointed out before that, you even though you had a lot of female friends as well too, that once you got to high school and everyone had graduated and kind of went their separate ways, friends you had known had gone to colleges and here in the States, among other places as well too, various other endeavors along the way. At that point, that's where you were almost in a position, if I recall correctly, how you describe it, like, what do I do now? Because I don't have that support system like I was growing up with, that I had grown up with here anymore. So then you had said in a nutshell, more or less, that you made some choices that weren't necessarily the best ones. And then down the line, you had become pregnant with your first child. You got pregnant again with your second child.
Yeah. And
then along the way, certain things had changed for you where you realized that you needed to make a difference in your life. And then you, if I recall correctly, you had said that you had gotten a PX90 workout routine worked out, and you were doing that on a frequent basis. Then eventually you got a trainer, and it kind of just evolved from there. And then you got into bodybuilding. So that is what I wanted to start here. But the reason I'm pointing that out is because what was interesting for me was to understand how you looked at yourself at that time and how things have changed for you along the way and how people look at you now. The reason I was pointing that out for you about how you were so focused on your training is because it almost sounded like to me that it was never really a thing about how you consider people's opinion about you, because you're just consumed with your training, among other things as well.
Yeah.
Then when you were hanging out with your friends in that period, it was more just it sounded like more of a camaraderie more than anything else. Mm-hmm. And then once they had left, then what's left for you to do? And then that's when you started exploring more or less other endeavors along the way too. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I was curious about with you that leads me to officially asking the question was that how you reacted to how people looked at you in terms of guys approaching you and how they were talking to you. And then along the way, once you had gone through those hurdles you had gone through, coming back from that and dealing with the emotional hurdles you also had to deal with as well too in your personal life, and then how people responded to you once you started to get in shape. Because what was interesting for me is how when people had responded to you, I was really curious at how along the way your perception had changed and when that had occurred, and how you learned to process the attention that you're getting, especially more so now that you're posting yourself on social media. Yeah. Recently, you've actually pointed out that you had done a photo shoot, I believe, for an upcoming calendar that's going to be coming down the line here. Yeah. So with that amount of attention that you're getting and the response that you're getting as well too, if this was you at a younger point in your life, the response the way you're handling it now probably would have been the same back then as well too. So again, I apologize for the elongated question, but I'm just curious about how you have developed the skill to be able to handle that with more eyes being on you and you posting yourself out there in that capacity, and what is different for you this time around than it was before, say, over 10, 20 years ago, if you will?
Well, 10, 20 years ago, there wasn't social media, for one. So, I mean, to tell you how I would have handled it back then, I don't know. When I went to world championships for Taekwondo, I was 17.
Right.
So at 17 years old, you're going through a whole bunch of changes in your life. You're graduating high school. You're expected to know what you want to do with your life, AKA like find a college and a career, which a lot of us, when we get out of high school, we have a thought of what we want to do, but 5-10 years down the road, that's actually not what we're happy with. So I didn't have a direction. But back then, I was never good in school. I was dyslexic, so I was never academically blessed, if you will. So I always focused on sports, and I was put in martial arts at 4, and I was always so good at it that's just where I put all my time, attention, and energy, because that's where I flourish, which as a human being, I think all of us gravitate towards what we're good at or what we enjoy. So because I was good at it, that's all I did. I trained 7 hours a day. And I would get a lot of attention in the sense that I was always winning tournaments. I was, constantly traveling to Vegas was spring nationals. Orlando, Florida was fall nationals. Worlds was in Little Rock, Arkansas. And so I got a lot of attention within the martial arts community at that time for just being recognized for my accomplishments and how good I was at the sport itself. But again, there was no social media. So it wasn't like I was being posted about it and having a lot of strangers come up to me, other than being at the tournament and somebody seeing me win or do a certain type of kick in a sparring match, and people would come and praise me for that kind of performance. Now social media is so big, and anything you post, you are victim to whoever has an opinion, whether it's good or bad. You have the keyboard warriors that just constantly have negative things to say and want to bring you down and want to critique your technique, which most of them probably haven't even punched a bag in their life. But then you have lots of people like, you look like you were meant to be in the movies, and like, you look like you kick ass and all this kind of stuff. So I mean, how I handle the attention now, I would say, is probably a lot better than I would have if social media was around at 17 years old. I don't think I probably would have done as well with it. Back then, I don't feel like my confidence was the same as it is now. And that took a lot of time, and a lot of like self-development, reflection, and all this kind of stuff that, the attention you get is just very surface level things. The people that are commenting on my page are mostly commenting about my appearance or my performance on something, but that doesn't change who I am or what my day consists of or what feeds my soul. So being on social media and giving these people access to give you their opinion, you have to be very good at just letting it roll off your shoulders and filter through it. So I think that to answer your question in more simple terms, I think that now I deal with that a lot better than I would have at 17 years old, but times are a lot different now.
So what's interesting for me though is because maybe I'm naive to assume this because I was under the impression that when it comes to, in this case, like martial arts training, that there's a sense of discipline that's instilled into you that translates well for the most part in various other fields that you may want to pursue.
Absolutely.
But what's interesting for me though is that once you kind of had that experience where you're figuring yourself out along the way, where more or less that disconnect had occurred, where you had mentioned before that I've hung around with the wrong crowd and didn't make good decisions. I'm just curious about how that set of disciplines that were instilled into you didn't roll over into certain areas where you realize that, okay, so if I make this choice and hanging out with these certain people here, that this is not going to be a good idea. And I'm not saying that you were not cognizant of it, but I'm just curious about what had occurred that was more or less kind of put in the back burner, and then you just pursued whatever was in front of you, whatever those reasons may be, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. I think because all throughout my earlier teenage years, I was so micro-focused on my performance and being an athlete and competing that I didn't get to really, and being homeschooled for that matter, I didn't really get to experience a lot of what other kids or what other teenagers were doing at that age. So the trouble, kids were getting in at 14, 15, 16 years old, I wasn't getting in because I was too micro-focused on, I wanted to be world champion. So I didn't experience those things. And then the federation that I was in started changing the rules. So they started implementing face protectors and body shields that made you feel like you were wearing like a marshmallow around you and that you were in a fishbowl. And to me, if you're in a martial art, you should be able to take a hit. And if you can't, then you shouldn't be in a martial art. So for myself as a competitor, I found it extremely hard to block because I had this big chest protector on because too many people were breaking their ribs, breaking their noses, which again, it's a martial art. If you can't take a hit, then you should not be in it. But for the lack of a better term, Taekwondo is a controlled martial art. So you're not supposed to be hurting people and breaking their bones. You're supposed to be, it's on a point basis. So if I kick somebody in the head, I get 2 points. Once you hit a certain amount of points, then you win the match kind of thing. So it wasn't meant to hurt anyone. And so I ended up dropping out around 17 because they started changing all these rules. And I felt like I just couldn't fight in those type of environments and circumstances. I couldn't block properly. I couldn't see properly. So it was like, you know what, maybe this just wasn't for me. And then instead of, maybe switching to another martial art and trying that out, I actually became clinically depressed. So I was medicated on antidepressants. I had overdosed on them at one point at 18 years old and put myself in the hospital. And just was in such a bad headspace that I think that my martial arts and what I had found and the passion and that being my outlet for my whole childhood, it just wasn't there anymore. And so it was, I guess, that part where you're depressed and you can't even control your emotions that kind of made me steer towards hanging out with the wrong people and doing, some things that weren't going to be good for my life. because I was clouded. I had a clouded judgment. I was lost, obviously mentally ill at the time. So I guess that's what kind of changed from the discipline and all that. When you got a chemical imbalance and you're being medicated and all this kind of stuff, you're not thinking about the courtesy and respect and discipline and the determination that you're taught with martial arts. I forgot all about that. And it was all about how to get out of bed every day. So I think that's kind of the reason why I steered the direction that I did.
So with the momentum you had for yourself, it seems like once you came to a full stop, that it's almost as if your body or yourself, in this case, just didn't know how to react to.
Kind of, yeah.
Is that more or less a that more or less kind of started that depression for you?
I had to go from 4 years old to 17 years old, competing and doing the same thing every day and having a purpose, really, other than going to school. And, as a kid, like you don't go to work. You don't have kids to take care of. You don't really have very many responsibilities. Right. So other than getting an education as a kid, like you have extracurricular activities maybe. And that's what I had. And from 4 years old to 17, that's what I lived and breathed, the martial arts. So it definitely, when I stopped that, it was like probably part of one of the reasons why I became clinically depressed, for sure.
And how long did it take for you to more or less get yourself out of that funk, if you will, to come to terms and deal with the situation at hand, where you realize you've gotten to a point where you can figure out what needs to be done to kind of get yourself a handle on things?
Well, I was medicated for about 1.5 years, 2 years, and I felt like the medication just made me worse. I had days where, I would just cry in bed all day. I had overdosed at one point and put myself in the hospital because it was just like I couldn't function. What helped is getting a dog. I got a dog at 19 years old. She was a wolf hybrid, and I stopped taking medication, and she was then my purpose for some reason. So, I call her like my guardian angel. She came in and it was just like, I had something to take care of now. So I couldn't be sad. I couldn't let myself fall into that rut. And she just pulled me up out of this dark hole, if you will. And so it was getting a dog, actually. And I had dogs growing up, but it was like getting one that was mine, that it was my responsibility to take care of, that kind of helped me pull myself out of that. And then it wasn't too long after I got pregnant. And then it was, when you're pregnant, you can't fuck around no more, So I had to grow up really fast because I was 20 when I got pregnant. So I had to grow up really fast. And then once I had her, there were spurts of time, maybe in the first year of having her, where, postpartum depression is definitely a thing. And I had felt times where I felt sad and I felt certain things that I might have felt in the past. But because I had her, it was like, no, she needs you. You can't let this take your headspace over again. So again, I feel like every single time it was like I was conditioning myself to be stronger, to push those feelings aside and not let myself give into the dark hole, if you will.
When you had your second daughter, that was more or less kind of like this catalyst that got you to start training again. You working your way through that. Mm-hmm. I'm not, it might be a silly question to ask, but when you were doing that, was that kind of the starting point where you started to see some differences in yourself as far as how before, maybe under these circumstances, you wouldn't have handled it this way, by taking an approach to find a way to decompress a little bit, to find a way to blow off some steam, and then having gone through the training sessions, that something along the way had changed about how you look at yourself as a result of making those sort of first steps here. So when you go through that, when you look back now in hindsight, do you think that was kind of the starting point where that change had occurred for you, or was that later on the road where you realized that something else had more or less pushed you further to go down more or less this path here?
It was definitely both of my daughters, not just after I had my second. After I had my first, I just felt insecure. And I knew that the only person that could change that was myself. And I wasn't in the healthiest relationship, so it didn't make me feel very good. And so after having to, and I did start working out with my first daughter. So it was a start. But again, it wasn't like I'd go to the gym. It made me uncomfortable. And so I did the P90X with my first daughter. And then I think all I did with my first daughter is I started going to the gym and just walking on the treadmill because I didn't know how to use the equipment.
Right.
And then by the time I had my second daughter, I switched gyms, and my little brother had started teaching me how to use the equipment. So I started using it. And then that's when it was like, this feels really good. So I guess like the endorphins that you get when you work out just kind of made me feel really good. And then it was an addiction. So it was like, okay, well, this makes me feel good, so I'm going to keep doing it. And then as I kept doing it, and the more people that I saw around me that were bodybuilders or trainers or whatever it may be, I was, 23 and looking around, I was like, oh, like I want to look like these people. Like these people look awesome. Like they must feel really good about themselves. So that's when I kind of hired a trainer, was about a year or two after that. And that was what kind of was like the light switch. As soon as I got a trainer and I learned so much more about the human body and how it works and how to train, it was only a matter of time before I wanted to do my first show. And my first show was in 2016. And my confidence at that level was just like way up.
Well, so it's interesting you brought that up, because you brought up before in the previous conversations you've had that the bodybuilding field, if you will, it can be, depending on the person, it can be a really good thing or a bad thing. And for you, to a degree, it was kind of like almost a negative than it was more of a positive. I mean, you had some positive experience, of course.
It was a roller coaster. It was a roller coaster in the sense that, I had struggles, losing the baby weight after 2 kids, got a trainer, lost the baby weight, but knew I could still be better. So committed to a show. Now, during the process of the first show, I felt like $1 million. It was amazing. I was confident. It was healthy for me at that time because it got me through a lot of hard times. But it was after that where I had lost myself again, in the sense I rebounded. I put on a whole bunch of weight, which I don't want to say is normal, but it is common in the bodybuilding industry after your first show that you put on a whole bunch of weight again, because you're like, oh, I did so good, and now I get to eat all these treats again. But your body is like, no, you haven't eaten these for 6 months. I can't metabolize this properly. I'm just going to store it as fat, and you just get it. I personally developed an unhealthy relationship with food after that, where I would binge until I felt sick and all this kind of stuff. So at that point, after my first show, it did end up being something negative. And then after that, it was like, well, I'm going to do another show so I can lose the weight that I put on after the first show. And then it was kind of
like a convenience in a lot of ways too.
Exactly. So it was a kind of like a toxic cycle there for a minute. And it wasn't until 2018, my last show, where I was able to almost detach with that emotional attachment with food. So it took me about 2-3 years for me to work through my emotional attachment with food that I developed through bodybuilding. And then it was like, okay, I'm going to eat to fuel my body. I'm not eating for pleasure anymore, or because I feel like I'm not getting enough food, or I'm quote unquote malnourished, in the sense of like, oh, well, I'm only eating chicken and asparagus for 6 months. Right. So, I learned balance in 2018. And then that's where I felt like my confidence grew and my power within myself grew even more, because it was like I didn't need bodybuilding to look good anymore. I could look good without it. And I didn't need a judge to tell me what I should look like. I wanted to look like the way I wanted to. And that was okay. And that was good enough, because I kept getting told my legs were too big and, this kind of stuff. And for somebody that's always had big legs, I didn't want to hear that no more. Right. So, in 2018, learned to train for me, learned to eat for me. And I no longer needed bodybuilding to be fit and look a certain way.
So the critiques that you're getting about your physique, in this case with your legs, and you talked just now about how you were sick and tired of hearing that, but now the way things have changed for you along the way, where a lot of people are complimenting that as well too, has your perception on how you receive that, either negative comments or positive comments, has that changed for you, and how you were able to process it a little bit better this time around as opposed to beforehand?
Yeah, I mean, like, obviously when you're getting on stage in a bikini and for a bodybuilding show that you prep for, you are subjective to their feedback.
Right.
Like, you putting yourself out there for their feedback. So it's kind of like you're doing it to yourself. I think that back then I took it personally. I think now it's just because, I always wanted to be the skinny girl back then. And now I want to be the strong girl, because being strong is in, being fit is in, having big legs is in. And back then I feel like I still had my mindset on wanting to be the skinny girl, which is what I grew up wanting to be, but I never was. So I think that now I just embrace who I am and how I'm built, what God put me on earth to look like, because we're all not supposed to look the same. And beauty comes in all shapes and sizes. And just because I have bigger legs now doesn't mean I'm less than anybody that has smaller legs or is thinner or, you know, maybe taller or may have more curves. So I feel like now just the growth that I've had over the last 10, 12 years, I'm so comfortable in my own skin now. So I don't care.
Well, so this is what's interesting for me then, because you know, what's interesting for me, because I think you might be the very first person that I'm going to lean towards asking this here, because what I, you know, for someone like myself, you know, as even though I do this, you know, on the side, and I put myself out there in this capacity, but at the same time, I'm also the type of person that doesn't want to put themselves out there. And there's a certain, I think, mindset that certain people have about how they want to go about certain things. And social media has definitely give a lot more exposure to a lot of people that probably would have never gotten that attention had it not been for that platform. And it can be a very good thing and very bad thing depending on the circumstance of the person. But when you started doing that for yourself, though, did you have any sort of either a preconceived notion about how you're looking at it, where being that I'm achieving it for these following reasons, or it's kind of by chance, and then the attention started coming in, and then you looking at it, and then maybe change your perception a little bit about how you want to go about it moving forward? Because I'm wondering, you know, once you started doing that, what the intentions were, and then whatever the intentions were at that time, if anything's changed along the way, depending on the response you were getting, be it good or bad, and that may have changed how you may look at how you may want to present yourself in whatever capacity that may be. Because from what I can recall in your social media posts, it seems like it's always been pretty consistent almost all across the board as far as what you post on there. But I'm not sure if there's any sort of differences in how you intend on presenting yourself, and then how you go about it now moving forward from here.
Honestly, there has been some differences. I mean, back, I'd say I guess in 2018, my last show, I was definitely very focused on the likes and the followers and probably the external validation of others, especially being in the bodybuilding industry when you're posting your physique and everything. Like and not to myself anymore, but at that time I was seeking like the external validation. I wanted to be told that I looked good. But you know, that was 5-6 years ago now. And with that being said, I think in 2018, I had about 8,000 followers. So I wasn't as big. I didn't have as big of an account as I do now. Now I see my Instagram, my social media as a business opportunity. I see it as a business rather than a social media account where I'm seeking likes, followers, and validation. Do the likes and followers and that come with it? Yes, it does. Nowadays, obviously, the more followers you have, the more appealing you are to maybe some brands that want to work with you, and in turn, you gain financial income from that kind of stuff. So the way I see it now is that I have to keep posting because this is a business. I have to keep up with certain workout videos or physique updates or this kind of stuff, because people follow your life on there. Like, and I'm the same way. I follow certain people and I know what they've been up to for, let's say, like the last 5 years. That's just the day and age we live in.
Right.
So now I just think of it as a business platform, a way to get more fitness clients, a way to inspire and motivate. The way I am as a trainer, and I guess I hate this term, but I'm going to use it, fitness influencer, is that I just want to be able to impact people positively as much as I can. I've never left a negative comment on anybody's page. If anybody ever tags me on something, like I just tried this exercise I saw on Miss Jazzy Fit's page, I'm like, you look great, like keep going. Like I'm like the biggest hype girl, and that's just what I want to be. I want to lift people up. So if somebody sees what I looked like after I had my second child, where I felt really insecure in my, I don't look anywhere what I look like now, And they see that, and then they see me now and they're like, you know what, I can do it too. That's what I want to be able to do. I want to be able to impact people in a positive way and make a big impact and change people's lives. So like, I may not be able to change somebody's life that just follows me and just looks at my pictures and, you know, double taps once in a while. But the person that reaches out to me for training, you know, I work with somebody for 6 months to a year and they're, you know, messaging me being like, Jazz, you changed my life. Like I've never been able to look at myself in the mirror like this and feel like good about myself. I've never been able to wear a dress without sleeves. I've never been able to do this or that. And that stuff feeds my soul and makes me feel like I'm actually making a difference.
So there's something that I'm really curious to get your perspective, because I've asked this question before in various capacities about people's perception on this. But from what you're describing to me now, it's very clear that you feel like there's a sense of purpose about why you're doing this here, and that clearly motivates you to pursue down this path. It obviously wasn't easy for you to get to this point. There's a lot of things you had to overcome. But it's interesting for me, because what I'm really curious to ask you now is that if it's a very noble thing that what you're describing here about why you're pursuing this here and what you want to do to help other people along the way. And obviously the social media platforms it's a business avenue to be able to gain more exposure, to get more opportunities and so on. With that being said though, I am actually really curious to see what your mindset is like now when it comes to the fact that, let's say, and I hope this never happens, but I'm curious to see how you're going to deal with this here, is that what happens if one day all that stops for you? So in other words, your social media accounts are not getting any new followers, you're not getting likes anymore, the response that you would normally be getting before are not coming in like they used to, whether it be positive or negative, but just any response in general. And then when it comes to your motivation, as far as I want to help people out, and that they say, well, I found somebody else who did it, who's doing it for me, but they're doing these things that actually works better for me, so I'm going to go to them now. Again, not that I want this to happen at all, but I'm curious about, if that were to occur, how do you think you would handle that, to prepare for that and learn to overcome those hurdles mentally, physically, whatever the case may be, to be able to deal with that? Would you think you'd be prepared to go from the ground up again and work yourself through that to overcome those said hurdles? Or do you think it's something you never thought about and understand? Now you have to think about how you're going to prepare for that if that were to occur.
Well, to be honest, I've never really thought of that as in the term of that would be more moving backwards than forwards. And so my frame of mind is always moving forward. So if anything, I want to impact more people, not less. But if there ever is any circumstances where somebody may say, you know, I don't feel like, you know, this, my journey is compatible with you, kind of thing. And I screen all my clients. We get on a call and I like to have a conversation with them about their goals and everything that's going on in their life, because I believe that a trainer ends up being somewhat of a life coach. We have to listen to the person, their traumas and what they've been through. So with that being said, I may not be the best fit for this person, and that's okay. Just like how two people may not be compatible in a romantic relationship or a friendship. So if somebody doesn't see me as the best fit as being their trainer after some time, I'm totally okay with that. I don't take that offense to it at all. It just means that there's somebody that is better for them, that works better for them. Maybe it's a mental state kind of thing. Maybe it's they like their workouts better. Maybe they give them certain foods that I may not give them in their plan, because, you know, I don't think a cheeseburger should be something that you eat on a daily basis if you're trying to lose body fat. You know what I mean? But
that was the hook right there.
Just like how if let's say me and a man don't work out when we're in a relationship, instead of looking at it like I'm never going to find somebody else, it just, the universe, that person was not meant for me. And so I see any kind of relationship in a fitness sense as well, is that I just wasn't meant for that person. So I don't take any offense to it, and I wish them the best. And I hope that whoever they do choose is able to give them the results or whatever that they are looking for, because a fitness journey is huge. And I feel like fitness is the building blocks for everything else in life and health. So if you feel good about yourself through fitness and health, I feel like your relationship with your partner will be better. I feel like you're going to do better at work and all that kind of stuff. And I want that for everybody. So just because they're not paying me to help you doesn't mean that I want ill upon you. I hope that whoever you do choose gives you what you need. Now, when it comes to the circumstance of me building myself back up again, I hope that I don't have to do that. And at that point, I probably would sit back and really do some internal thinking about, is this what I'm meant to be doing? Is there maybe a different avenue that I'm meant to be doing? Maybe my life is supposed to go a different way and it isn't fitness and health. Do I enjoy this? Does it make me feel like I have a purpose? Absolutely. But the plan's not to move backwards, it's to move forwards and impact more. So if I went to, less, like you said, no more followers and like all this kind of stuff, I don't know. I don't know if I'd go down that route again.
So this is interesting that I want to delve a little further with you because it's funny because I had a conversation with somebody actually last week that was very much in the same mindset as yourself, where they believe things happen for a reason and they think there's a purpose for it. And personally, for myself, I'm not one of those people, and I'm not here to judge anybody about that, but it's just my personal belief is that the idea of someone saying that they believe things happen for a reason, that there's a purpose for their said endeavors and whatever the case may be, it's conflicting with me, for which it's too much of a rabbit hole to delve into here. But essentially what I'm getting to is that I understand it. I really do. But I guess what I'm trying to understand is the person's perspective on why they believe that, because when you described just now about how you felt like, if this doesn't work out, does that mean I'm meant to do this? Maybe I'm meant to do something else. And you mentioned before, you said something specifically earlier about, God put you in this earth for a reason. You are the way you are and the way that he put you together and so on. So with my previous guest, I had asked her about her, because she's religious herself, but what she was stating was that, she felt like whenever she needed an answer to whatever decision making she has to go through here, that God would always give her an answer. And I understood her perspective when she delved into it further. But what I'm referring to you specifically is that when it comes to that thought process for yourself and how you look at things and how you believe things are meant to be the way they are, because that's the way that the plans are laid out. And if it doesn't work out, and then if you don't get an answer as to what the next avenue is and what the next step is going to be, despite your efforts in trying to find the answer, there's nothing being presented to you. There's no clear cut, this is the way to figure, or this is the path. It's up to you to take it. And there's nothing of that sort. Do you believe that for yourself, you would be able to still comprehend and figure out, okay, well, if there's no set path for me to take here, and I got to figure it out from the ground up with no sort of layout for me to figure, to kind of figure out that to walk down that path, if you will. Again, I hope it's not a convoluted question to ask, but I hope you understand what I'm referring to here. But how do you think you would handle that for yourself, and having to deal with no sort of purpose, but for you to figure out and make the purpose on your own and make that more or less your lifestyle, if you will?
Well, I mean, my daughters are always going to be my purpose as well. So aside from what I do in the aspect of fitness and health and career and all that kind of stuff, I feel like I'm always going to have a purpose because I'm a mother.
Right.
So, I mean, if I, lost my way when it comes to my career and my brand and the fitness and health stuff, I still have two daughters. So, I mean, when it comes to that, I still have a purpose. I have a purpose of being a mother, and that's never going to change.
Right.
So just being a strong, independent woman, an individual where, a good role model where they can look up to, I'm constantly teaching them in the kitchen as to why we eat the foods that we eat for dinner, opposed to, hot dogs and French fries every night. And, they're in different sports, and my schedule is jam packed with taking them to these sports and hoping that they, giving them the support and avenues to make them the best successful little humans that they can be, that I really feel like I wouldn't be that lost, to be honest, or to feel like I never would have a purpose, because being a mom is number one for me. So,
in doing that, but in doing that though, do you get more fulfillment in this case, providing for your daughters and looking for the best interests, providing some guidance for them and being there for them overall, as far as their day-to-day lives are concerned, more so than, it's a silly question as I understand, but it's more so than your business endeavors, like where if people are saying, if you're in high demand and you are sought after and you are in a position where you can make a lot of money, understanding that the temptations that could come with that, and knowing that if I walk down this path, there's great opportunities in various areas that I know I'll be able to succeed because I know I can handle that. But that means that my time with my daughters will be minimized to a great deal, or if, maybe not as much, but just enough to take away important times that I could have with them if I focus on these areas here. So
a question that does pop up into my head more frequently than the other ones,
right.
Because I have spoken to them about moving down into the States before, a few times, just because when it comes to, my industry and that kind of stuff, that if a job opportunity, like when we go back to the martial arts stuff, I'm practicing now because I'd like to be part of action films. I'd like to be part of like fight scenes in action films. And so with that being said, if, mommy got an opportunity to be in, this industry and we had to move, let's say to LA or California, we would have to move. And then, the kids are not so keen on doing that. And I said, well, listen, if mommy can go somewhere to make more money, to provide a better life for you, to be able to, my oldest wants to be a doctor, for example. She wants to get a doctorate, that's 7 years of school, and that's a lot of money. Right. So, I tell them that, like, there's certain things, these hard decisions mommy's going to have to make in order to support you and give you to give you a life that I could only have dreamed of. I want to be able to show them the world, for example. So to be able to do that, you need money to travel. Right. But I would like to take them to every country and show them different cultures, because even I took them to Mexico last year, and going up into the mountains of Puerto Vallarta, my youngest started crying because there's dogs that don't have homes, and the kids have dirt soccer fields, and the schools have no windows. So I want them to have perspective on how lucky they are to have the life that they have, to humble them, to keep them grounded, and to educate them on different cultures, different foods, different dance, and all this kind of stuff. And then, if my daughter really does want to become a doctor, that is going to cost me a lot of money. And I don't want her to take out student loans or have to worry about it. I just want her to worry about her studies and getting stuff done. The hard decision of balancing my time with my daughters and being there for the times that you're not going to get back, and working, it's, to be honest, I don't know. I feel like I would try my best to still be there as much as I can, but I also know that I am the sole provider for them as well. So with that being said, I have a responsibility and a job. And I guess, but depending on the person you ask, they may think that that everything I'm describing is living past beyond our means, in the sense that a lot of people have to make the hard decision that, okay, well, if we can't afford to go to school and become a doctor, then you just have to become, you have to go work at the corner store, this kind of thing. Like, that's the reality for a lot of people. Yeah. And like traveling the world, like a lot of people haven't even been on an airplane. Yeah. So, maybe these dreams that I have don't equal giving them a better life. And I've thought about that as well. Maybe to them, spending time with me is a better life, not traveling the world and all these things. But I'm still working through all that, if you will. Right. I'm at this point in time where, I ran my father's sawmill equipment company and proved to myself that I was capable of things that I never thought that I was capable of. And I just keep getting all these opportunities in front of me. And I feel like that's just because of karma, in a sense, and me always trying to act in a kind way and in a good way, positive way. I'm the first person to help an old lady out, with her groceries and anything that I can do on a daily basis just to be a better person, that I have all these opportunities, and now it's what to act on. And I just want to keep growing, and I just want to keep, I want a bigger house for the girls. And now my mom's retired. And so I want to take care of my mom. I don't want her to have to worry about anything. And so I guess I'm a little bit like my daddy in that sense, where I just try to take.
So it sounds like you overwhelm yourself in a little bit, in a lot of ways, where you're taking on a lot of responsibilities.
Oh yeah.
So this is what's interesting about what you just said right there, because I'm actually really curious about that part of yourself where you're taking on so much, and not taking on so much. I mean, there's a fine purpose of what you're pursuing here, but it's tacked on other things that go with that that you're focusing on as well. I'm not saying that you've ever gotten to the point where you like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm not saying that, but I'm wondering if when you ever get to a point where you're like, enough's enough right now, I got to stop and recollect, because as much as your daughters are because you mentioned before that your daughters are telling you, you're not eating with us, you're just sitting still because you're at your bodybuilding competition at that time, and you're just kind of leaving yourself out of this moment here because you are focusing on other things rather than focusing on the moment with us. Mm-hmm. So when you go through that, and then it shows me, at least at this point right now, that you have been able to find a rhythm for yourself and how to kind of balance that out. But then these new set of responsibilities that are starting to tack on, where not to say you weren't thinking about it, but now that they're being presented and you realize, okay, now the time's getting closer to get to that point. How do I prepare for that? And then you start figuring out a plan. And I'm wondering if, at any point, especially given your background with how you've dealt with depression before at that time, if you are more mentally prepared on how to deal with those said responsibilities, and then having to filter out what's the primary focus for you to start with, and then take it from there, and then kind of figure it out along the way. Because it sounds like to me that you've got your handle on things, but there's still a part of me that thinks that even though just now you just admitted that you're still figuring it out, but what exactly are you going to put as a priority to kind of figure out what's going to work best for you, and not to cause any strain on yourself and everyone else around you as well too, as a result of the responsibilities you want to take on here?
To be honest, you just take it day by day. Okay. In the sense that every day I have a set of things that need to be done. Sometimes they don't all get done. Sometimes I get an influx of new clients, and then I'm a little bit overwhelmed because when you first get a new client, of course, it's a little bit more of a process than it is working with somebody 6 months down the road, because their likes and dislikes, if they're working with any injuries, what they do day to day. When you're getting a new client, you need to know what they do for a living. Do they have a sedentary lifestyle, or do they have an active lifestyle? Do they have kids, or do they not have kids? Because these are all things that are going to affect their results. So, I just take it day by day. My daughters do say that I work too much, but I do make sure that every day that I do have time just to even sit on the couch with them and just put my arms around them and tell them how much I love them. I can't even count how many times a day I tell them that I love them because they need to know that. I make sure that I'm the one person, I'm here in the mornings waking them up. I'm the one packing their lunches. Some days my mom does have to take them to school because I'm working with clients and that kind of thing, but I'm the one packing their lunches and I'm the one waking them up. I like to think that I'm here present, at least 4 or 5 days a week to put them to bed. Maybe there are some days where I'm, again, busy with clients or, having to go do my training at that time because I didn't have time during the day. But I'm one person. I like to think that I'm close to being Superwoman sometimes. And so I just tackle every day as it is. I do try to more so in the summertime or around holidays to take days where I go take them to make memories. So we go to the lake for a day and my phone is away and we paddleboard and we swim together. And I make sure that I'm at every single one of their soccer and basketball games. So I may not be at every practice, maybe grandma has to take you because mommy's working, but I will be there at every game and they will remember that. So I feel like right now I've learned how to balance. Sometimes, yes, I do feel overwhelmed, but right. I'm thinking that this year is a breakthrough year for me in a sense that, I'm going to be able to establish a team of people that help me with all my business endeavors where I'm not just a one-woman show anymore. So it will help me.
Delegating, basically?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, have an assistant, have people that kind of manage certain aspects of my social media, for example, or, I have an agency now and this kind of thing. So if I have a team of people that are working to help me build and brand and everything, that I'll be able to allocate a little bit more time to being a mom because I've sacrificed, whatever time I have with them to be able to, pay for their basketball, pay for their soccer, because those things cost a lot of money. And here I am doing it all. So
I'm curious with this here, and I hope you don't mind me throwing myself in the mix with this, because when I had reached out to you and to speak with you, I remember, I remember the email you sent me, which you said, "I'm so sorry for delaying, for responding late and whatnot." And it's not uncommon for me to see that. Everyone is busy. I understand that, but What was interesting for me is having you explain all this here to me about what more or less your day-to-day routine is like.
Mhm.
Um, there's a part of me that wonders if I hadn't asked you to
Yeah.
would you come on my show, what would you be doing and this at this time right now? More likely you doing something with your business, spending time with
Mhm.
your daughters.
Yeah.
So because you have a very busy schedule,
Yeah.
uh, I'm actually really curious about it what um what more or less compelled you to want to say yes, understanding your busy schedule here and making the time to be able to speak with me on this here because I always find it fascinating when someone is really, really busy, but yet makes the time. And as far as what their reasons behind it, it varies, but for the most part, it's pretty consistent, but there's different variations behind them. So
Mhm.
when it comes to something of this sort here, how do
Yeah.
you prioritize and saying, I'm if I focus my time on this, there's more chances that I'll be getting more momentum doing this here. But to speak with, Rob for this allotted time,
Yeah. Yeah.
what are you getting out of it to do it in this capacity?
Okay, I'll be completely honest. I hate talking to the camera. And I know that part of my job is talking to the camera. So you are the third podcast that I've done in probably the last 6 months.
Right.
So any that, there are people that will send me random emails, and unless like they have some sort of credentials behind their request, like if you have your own little podcast channel, you had sent me a link that had your previous work in it and this kind of
Right.
stuff, and any other podcasts that I've been on, they had provided the same credentials that show that they are actually a podcast,
Right.
and no matter how, quote unquote, I don't want to say small or whatever, like, there's, who's a big podcast out there?
Joe Rogan, you have
That one. Yeah, you
yeah,
know what I mean? So
right,
no matter how small, we all start from somewhere. And
right,
I feel like I've always struggled speaking to the camera and sharing my story, and everybody wants to know more about me. But then, I'm very limited just posting workout videos and pictures.
right.
So I feel like this is part of my comfort zone where I'm trying to push out of my comfort zone. So
Mm,
the people that are reaching out to me for podcasts, I'm saying yes, because this is not part of my comfort zone. So I'm trying to break out because you grow from being out of your comfort zone. And so that's one of the reasons why I started doing podcasts, because I hate talking to the camera. But if I want to continue to make better quality workout content and, do programs that, I'm speaking to the camera and explaining certain exercises and everything, I need to be more comfortable with doing it. So this is just part of me stepping out of my comfort zone. And so anybody that's been reaching out to me with a podcast that has, the credentials behind it to show that, they're just not, some dude trying to get on the phone with me, if you will,
okay.
that I'm, comfortable or trying to push out of my zone and,
Right.
kind of thing. So that's kind of what I've been doing the last little while with, this is helping me grow by giving you an hour of my time with speaking with you about my journey and everything. It's helping me grow as an individual and as a brand. So that's why I allocate whatever time I can to people like yourself who reach out.
So I'm curious about your more or less your because you described kind of your vetting process here to determine who you're going to speak with.
Yeah.
When it comes to this here, because this is your third interview in this capacity you're having with somebody here. So the first time, it was Tales of a Gemini, I believe is what it
Yeah.
was, right?
Yeah.
When you're going through that for the first time,
Yeah.
I'm assuming that to some degree I'm not sure if you were aware of the show ahead of time, but if you were or were not, and you started delving into kind of get an idea what the show is all about, how they conduct and all that sort of stuff.
Mhm.
Did you have a perception about how I'm going to go about in presenting myself, and if they're going to ask me these questions, what kind of questions am I comfortable with them asking? Because that's, before we more or less got started here, I asked you what are your what's
Yeah.
the territories you want to avoid and asking here, because it's something that I come to understand that and from my perspective, I like to do as much research as I can. And one of the things I do is listen to conversations that the person that I'm asking to be on the show
Yeah.
on is how they conduct themselves in that capacity, whether they be hosting or whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
So I have an understanding about, so if I get into these areas, I know that they avoid it, or if I get into these areas, they're more open, whatever the case may be. Um, so when you're looking at that for yourself, and this being the third time you're doing it, has anything changed about how you look at this and how you want to approach it that may have differed from the first time, at least up to this point?
No, not really. I mean, every single time you are like going into it with a little bit of, I don't want to say nervousness or anything, but a little bit of a, I guess, part of you, like, is this person going to ask me something that I'm really uncomfortable with? Which I haven't been asked anything that I'm super uncomfortable with. So I don't even know to what aspect, what question would make me feel that way.
Right.
But I always kind of wonder what direction someone is going to go in. But I mean, I feel like when it, like, let's take the Q&As, for example, that I do on my Instagram, because that gives all these random people a way to ask you a whole bunch of questions, which, right here, it's just me and you. So you're the one dictating all the questions. It's all the questions that you want to ask. But if I do a Q&A, it's whoever decides to put a question in the question box. However, I still get to choose which ones I answer. So, I mean, I just leave the ones out that there's lots of silly stuff in there, mind you. But I think that the most stuff that, like, I guess I'm not as comfortable sharing would be more like in a relationship standpoint.
Right.
I am single, but I get a lot of questions on Instagram about what my type is and, like, have I ever been married, and, like, how am I still single, and, like, all this kind of stuff. And I think that stuff is probably where I'm the most uncomfortable with sharing, just because being so much on social media and in everybody's eye and everything, there's certain aspects of my life that I would like to keep private in that sense. So being a mom and being a fit mom, I feel like it is part of my platform. It's part of my brand, in the sense that there's a lot of moms that have been insecure and overweight after having kids. And with me, it shows that you can do it, and you can eat healthy and still have children and have them eat, a different variation of your prep food, let's say. So with that, I feel like that totally ties into me and my brand. So I'm okay with sharing that I'm a mom. I'm okay with sharing my kids. I don't need to keep that private. But I feel like when it comes to romantic sense, anything I have going on relationship wise, that is something that I'm more uncomfortable sharing, because, again, some parts of my life I want to be able to keep private. So that's probably the one thing, but nobody's really pressed into that. So I don't think I really need to worry about it.
But do you, when it comes to questions that you talked about before that would more or less make you uncomfortable, was that something that you were more or less prepared to possibly deal with? In this case, let's say with the first interview, where you thought to yourself, okay, so if they ask these questions, how am I going to react to said question?
I just probably would be like, it's not something that I'm really, like, into talking about. And then, like, I mean, anybody that's, I'm sure, in your position in a podcast will possibly have somebody that feels that way about a question that you may ask, and not let you ever come from it from a place of wanting to dig deep into somebody's life or make them uncomfortable. But with you and I just exchanging a few emails, it's a very surface level communication. You don't know who I am, or I don't know who you are. So it's very hard to tell that once you get into a interview setting with somebody, what they are and aren't comfortable with. So with that being said, I mean, I feel like anybody in your position would be super respectful, in the sense that, if I said that, that's maybe a topic that I don't feel so comfortable touching on, that they wouldn't think anything of it, just be like, okay, and move on, kind of thing. So I think that, I don't have to worry about it too much. I think if I did a live on my Instagram, that's more so when I have to worry about people pressing for stuff that I don't feel so comfortable talking about. But I mean, like, I think that in an interview setting that everybody's pretty respectful. So I don't really have to worry about it.
So I want to shift gears with you real quick on something that I actually it sort of hit close home to me, that I want to bring up about your father, because this is something that I think will be the first time that I'll be revealing it in this capacity. Those that know me personally will already know this here, but you had said something, about your father with regards to when he had gained a lot of weight, and you took care of him, and you had tried your absolute best to try to help him with his diet, and he's been very resistant with what he wanted to eat and so on. And eventually, by more or less by default, whatever you gave him, he had no choice but to eat, with the exception maybe some people who may have enabled him by giving what he wanted. And then, you pointed out before that he was a type 2 diabetic as well, too, if I recall, right? So, and he was insulin dependent as well. Is that right? Okay. So this was interesting for me because I've never shared this before on the show at all. But when I heard you say that and how that impacted you, and that more or less really kind of put you in that path of I'm going to train people that I'm not interested in training other athletes because for the reasons you pointed out beforehand, but you're more or less want to helping. I think if I recall correctly, more towards like mothers and females that were overcoming image issues, weights, and whatever the case may be. That's your primary focus when it comes to the training. But what was interesting for me, though, is because when you started talking about your father, and there's no doubt in my mind that in the experience you had with your father about getting him to eat the healthiest food, considering his health condition and the resistance you met from that I'm sure a lot had changed for you on how to deal with that moving forward. So when you shared that story, and this is what I was talking about, what I'm going to reveal here is that, so this month literally marks the 20-year anniversary since I've had diabetes. I've been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes back in April of 2003, just before I had turned 18.
Interesting.
So when I was diagnosed, it was one of those situations where I literally had no idea what the symptoms were. I knew of diabetes. It was more of the situations where I was told that you just can't have sugar. So I literally thought that meant no candy at all. I can have pizza, I can have burgers, but I failed to realize that carbs turn to sugar when you eat it.
Carbohydrates, just sugar.
Right.
Yeah.
So once my mother, my grandmother, my mom's mom, had type 2 diabetes. She's no longer with us now, but she had type 2 diabetes. So my mom was very familiar with the symptoms. And when she saw what I was experiencing at the time, because I remember, it's funny because at that time I was just starting to work out too. I was literally starting to work out, and I remember seeing some improvements. And then all of a sudden, all the weight gain that I was garnering had started to diminish because my sugar was going through the roof. I was constantly peeing all the time, and it was just like I had no idea what was going on. And then when my mother had looked into a little further, said, I think you have diabetes. Like, no, I don't. And then she ended up taking the hospital, and then we found out that was the case.
Yeah.
So now 20 years later, since I've been having this here, I've had, when you started talking about your father's reaction to you about let me live my life, I trust me, I know exactly how that feels. And it was one of those situations where when I heard you share that story, and what really spoke to me was because when you had said your father was, I think you mentioned before, he was over 400 pounds and you helped him lose the weight.
Yes.
It's funny that you mentioned that because last year, I'm 5'8", and the most I peaked at, because I gained a lot of weight as myself too, was close to 250. So I was severely overweight at that point for myself. Yeah. And then having a conversation with my wife last year where she was getting in shape, and she was getting in really good shape too. And despite the fact that I was motivated in seeing her doing that, I didn't feel motivated to get myself out of that funk, if you will. Yeah. Yeah. But one conversation that we had one night, literally, it was one of those situations. I remember I had made a decision that night that I'm not going back to what I was doing before. So quite literally overnight, I had changed everything. My diet had changed and a lot of things, and then started to work out. Now I've lost the weight, and I've been able to maintain a pretty consistent sugar level as a result of that. There are some highs and lows, but that's standard from working out and whatever else.
Like that, yeah. Right.
So when I heard you had shared that story, that was one of the reasons why I actually wanted to talk to you about that, because it's interesting for me to hear someone who had been up close and personal with that and the impact that it had on you as a result of that. And I understand you've shared on more than one occasion how your father's death had obviously impacted you, but then the responsibility that came after the fact that I'm assuming probably didn't give you a lot of time to kind of process certain things, because now you were hit with a bunch of other things that you have to deal with right away. And what's interesting for me is that I don't know if I don't think you've ever commented before about this here, but I was hoping if you're willing to, on how you've been able to process it now since your father's passing, after you dealt with your father's business and paying off the debts that were still left behind. And I believe you said you had sold the business as well too, if I recall correctly, not too long ago.
I'm actually in the current process of dissolving it. Yes.
Okay, so you're in that process right now. So clearly, there's still some lingering things after the fact that were left from your father. But I'm not sure if you ever had the time to process all that stuff. So I was bringing myself into this here because when I heard that story, some similarities, but I think what really affected me the most is when I heard you talk about how it affected you and how you wanted your father to be around to walk you down the aisle, see your children grow and graduate and all that stuff. And now that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And when I hear it, I talk to my wife as well too about those scenarios for ourselves, where it's one of those feelings for myself now that if I hadn't made that decision to change that, I would have been easily the most selfish person out there, because the effect it would have had on her, my son, the people that I care about as well too.
Yeah.
That it's one of those things I didn't think about how it could actually affect them until, I made that decision that night. And as time has gone by, a lot of things I've been able to process the little things a bit differently now. So in hearing you share that, I hope that you can delve into about how you've been able to process things a little bit now, a bit more differently. And then when you come across other people very similar to your father's background, as far as the refusal of accepting help, refusal to cooperate, to eat healthy, when you're starting to deal with that and you see that for yourself again, not being your father, but understanding that confrontation, if you will, how you think you've been able to process that this time around as opposed to how you dealt with your father. I understand there's a major difference between the two people that you would be speaking with, but I wonder how that's changed for you along the way and how you conduct yourself and under those circumstances, whereas before it's like, it almost like you were begging your father, just do it, please. And he's refusing it. And then you had to force him, which forced the change, but it wasn't under cooperative terms, if you will. So I hope you don't mind the elongated story and the question, but I hope you understand why I wanted to ask that to more lead off with that here.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still dealing with a lot of the residual leftovers of my dad's life.
Right.
So it's been 1.5 years since he passed, and I'm just still in the process of dissolving his business. We're still dealing with an estate lawyer with his estate, and I just sold his apartment back in February. So I feel like I still haven't really been able to dig deep and dive into feeling grief from the whole situation. I feel like I'm constantly suppressing my feelings about losing him because I'm just too busy dealing with everything he left behind. With that being said, if we're getting on a more personal note, I still feel a lot of resentment and anger towards him because he probably would have still been here if he made these lifestyle changes a lot earlier. And I felt like food and his lifestyle was more important than staying here with us. And being his caretaker for the 5 years before he passed, there was a lot that I had to do as a daughter that I felt like wasn't fair. Having to help him shower because he had got, a blood infection because he would stub his toe. And because of the lack of circulation, because of diabetes, he couldn't feel it. And then he wouldn't clean it properly. And then it would get infected. And then his blood would get infected, which then in turn turned into a septic situation where he was hospitalized on IV. And when he would come out, he would be so weak that he could not shower himself. So there I am helping my father shower, who's, 300 something pounds at the time, isn't easy. Having to, lift up skin folds and all this kind of stuff to dry him. There was times where, I had a personal masseuse that would come in to massage his legs because, again, circulation.
Right.
He did have a key to the place. And, I got a phone call from her one day saying that your father's on the floor. And so he had fallen, which was not an uncommon occurrence near, the last 5 years of his life, where he had fallen getting out of the shower. And this was before the whole septic situation where I was having to help him, and it was just after I got the kids from school. And so we had to go, help him up off the floor. And there are my daughters see, Papa naked on the floor, bleeding everywhere. And, it's quite traumatizing in that sense. There was times I'd get phone calls in the middle of the night saying he couldn't get up off the floor because he fell going to the bathroom. And so I'd have to go, my younger brother lives upstairs at our house here, and I'd have to go wake him up because I couldn't pick him up by myself. Dealing with the eye injections because of the loss of eyesight through diabetes again. And then, near the end, we were on a wait list, or we were waiting for his kidney numbers to get low enough for him to get a kidney replacement. Because again, if you're not managing your sugars, you're doing a lot of damage to your kidneys. So these are all.
He refused you or your kidney offer as well to do the transplant.
My brother was getting tested to see if he was going to. He refused to take mine because I had the girls. But then my older brother had tried to offer his, and my dad was less was more open to it because at the time he didn't have children, and he knew that my lifestyle revolved around fitness, and he thought that if I gave him my kidney, that my lifestyle would never be the same. And knowing what I did for a living, and that I had 2 daughters, he didn't want that for me. But my older brother didn't have any kids, and he didn't live a healthy lifestyle, so he was more inclined to be open to taking his, and it was all a process that we were in when he passed. But these are all, and again, knee replacements because of lugging around 400 pounds. And, I was the one that was at the hospital with him every day and doing physio with him every day. And he would get angry with me. Like I was his punching bag because I was the one always taking care of him. So dealing with this, and then, near the, let's say the last year of his life, knowing the instability of his health, I would constantly encourage him to handle some affairs, knowing that he wasn't going to be here forever, trying to mentally prepare myself that he has made this decision on his own. And so with that being said, there was lots of arguments about certain financial situations with the business and everything that, I kept voicing to him, like, Daddy, you are going to leave this for me to handle. Like, do you not understand this? So I'm still working through a lot when it comes to my dad. I still feel like I haven't had the opportunity to sit with the grief of it all because I'm still left with dealing with all of his stuff. Now, dealing with other people that have the same circumstances, I currently have a 19-year-old type 1 diabetic. She was diagnosed at 12 years old. She comes and trains with me here at my home. I built a gym here. And I feel like I have a soft spot for her because a type 1 diabetic is not something that you can control. My father was a type 2. And in my personal opinion, type 2 is like you basically gave it to yourself with an unhealthy lifestyle.
Yeah, I agree too.
It was a prolonged unhealthy lifestyle that you basically diagnosed or you gave it to yourself.
Right.
So with Daddy, I didn't really have much sympathy because, you basically ate yourself to be a diabetic, a type 2. Yeah. With my client, she's 19 years old, was diagnosed at 12. She's not overweight, and all this kind of stuff. And just hearing the stories that her mom has told me about, what they've had to go through because of the instability of the sugars and all this kind of stuff. Like even when she comes in to train with me, she'll have her blood sugars will be about at a 20. And as we're working out for that hour, they will go down lower and lower. And we're about at a 12 when she leaves, which I'm sure that you understand now that that day you decided to change your lifestyle, that working out helps manage your sugars.
Yeah.
So with her, I have to be quite careful though, because if they go too low too fast, she feels sick, she could pass out. Mm-hmm. And with that being said, she is also a pescatarian. So, when you take a group of food, this kind of thing, she relied a lot on carbohydrates.
Right.
So, her mom was like, can you please educate her and encourage her to eat properly? Because, protein's important for anybody's lifestyle, no matter what your diet is, no matter what your condition is, protein's important. Right. But when you take out, chicken and beef and everything else as a diabetic, and then you leave, some seafood, and then, you're eating a lot of carbs and stuff. So, now with her, I'm trying to be a good role model and be somebody that impacts her life in a positive way and encourages her to, you don't need to eat a plate full of pasta. We can have, a cup of pasta and then have, your shrimp or whatever else, kind of thing. So I definitely feel like anybody that's a type 1 diabetic in particular, I feel a lot of empathy towards, just because of the education and experience that I have with diabetes in general. Now I know type 1 and type 2 are different, but you're dealing with a lot of the same problems in the sense of your sugars and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
I like working with diabetics, to be honest, because of my background. I'm no doctor, but because I guess the emotional attachment that I had with Daddy with it, I just feel like I want to help people that want the help, because Daddy didn't want it. But I learned so much being with him. And actually, now that we're on the topic, One thing that as a fitness professional that is currently driving me batshit crazy is the fact that people are on Ozempic, because my father was on Ozempic.
What's Ozempic here?
It's a type of insulin that helps you lose weight when you're
that. Oh yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah, that's stupid as hell.
It originally prescribed for people with diabetes.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about now.
Type 2 than type 1, because type 2 tend to be overweight and all this kind of stuff. So to get their weight under control and their sugars under control and everything, it's an insulin prescribed by a doctor to help them lose weight, but it's meant for diabetics. Now, this fad that's going on, I see people publicly speaking about it on social media, being like, oh, are you on Ozempic? And all this kind of stuff. And it drives me nuts that all these people, housewives, celebrities are on and now there's a shortage of it. And now if my father was still here and dependent on this insulin, and I saw all these people posting about it and he couldn't get it because all these people's selfish reasons of wanting to lose weight and be skinny, but they can't control what's going in their mouth and they can't get off their butt and work out. Whew, God help me. I have been meaning to speak about this on my social media actually, but now that we were on the topic, I just thought I'd let that out.
But here's what I did want to say in closing with you, because as I mentioned just earlier now, well, less than 10 minutes ago, I think it was, seeing that reel the first time around, it was purely just seeing the kicks and what you mentioned before. That really was what got to me about, I haven't done this in 17 years. And you mentioned about how you understood how it wasn't executed well. And then I saw the next reel. To me, it showed that you've gotten better. But then hearing your story, and as I mentioned before, hearing what you had gone through with your father, that was really what got to me, because it's not something that I openly talk about, not because I'm afraid of it. It's not none of that. It was never something that came up, because in this particular field is, with the show that I do here, I talk with various people from almost various different backgrounds that have different fields that I want to delve into with them. And even though I have talked with fitness trainers before, for some reason, it never just dawned on me to bring it up about my diabetes. Just never did. Mm-hmm. But once you had shared that story about your father and understanding the hardships that came with that, my grandmother was a type 2 diabetic. I don't recall if that was the reason why she had passed away, but I do know that she was not. She had a stroke. No doubt in my mind, diabetes was almost a contributing factor. She just did not take care of herself at all.
My passed away from a stroke as well.
So I know what you mean by the hardships on that. But when I was listening to you share that story, it was interesting for me because, this July would be the 1 year more or less anniversary that I decided to officially make that change. It was a literally overnight thing where tonight's going to be the day, or tonight's the moment that I'm going to make that decision. And the next day, nothing had ever been the same. Mm-hmm. So, and even when it came to that point where I was really tempted to go back and, eat shitty food again, a part of me kept telling myself, do you really want to go back to that? Because if that's what you want to go back to, you might as well just dig yourself a grave right now, because you're going to waste your time. And having that self-reflection at that moment really changed a lot for me. Mm-hmm. And, I've been able to keep a consistent lifestyle as a result of that, and actually making that change. Not to say that it was always like that, but there's more irresponsible decision makings than there were responsible ones. And then almost in the last year, a lot more responsible decision-making process. I've been through the routines here now. So hearing that story and having you share that was really what made me want to talk to you, because I was curious about the thought process you go through from, having your father give you an opportunity to in a sense where you have been able to focus full-time, train full-time on your martial arts school, among other things as well too. And then after all that had occurred, some things had come along the way that more or less have, hurt you, but then you've been able to overcome that. Mm-hmm. And then dealing with your father, that to me seemed like that was the hardest one that you had to overcome. But I had a feeling that you never had the time to truly process it. Because as soon as you mentioned that once your father passed away, I had to deal with the business now, that to me spoke to me that, okay, you never had the time to truly let it sink in, to process all that information, because you're occupying a lot of your time. And that's the part that interested me the most about how you deal with that, because I don't think I've really had anybody to discuss with about what you do at this level for yourself in your life and your career. And one of the most painful things is the fact that you're intending on wanting to help somebody and they're refusing that help, and it's the person you're the most closest to that is refusing it.
Mm-hmm.
So when I heard that and I started thinking about this, I mentioned before, thinking about my wife, my son, my dogs, my bird, everybody. And I thought, like, if I do that, that would make me the most selfish person. And that's the one thing I don't want to be anymore.
Mm.
So for you to be able to actually more or less close off with and saying that and sharing that with me, that actually does. I'm hoping that this gives a lot of more perspective about who you are as a person. I mean, I'm sure we've heard it before with your previous conversation, but this is the one that I was the most interested in pulling out here from you, because I felt like that, I think, would truly show your real motivation as far as why you do what you do. And I think that's really what I came down to at the end of the day for me to truly connect with your journey, if you will. And that's the reason why I wanted to speak with you on this here. So I understand that there's a lot of things you're working on. I'm sure a lot of you cannot indulge here with, but I was hoping that maybe in closing, if there's anything that you would like to more or less, I know you're not a really big fan of promoting for yourself, but I want to know if there's anything. Yeah,
I'm not a salesman.
Right, I know you're not, but I just want to know if there's anything in particular that you would like maybe to close out with for anyone to be on the lookout for, considering with what you've been able to share, and hopefully be able to gain some attention as far as like what they could be to look out for down the line, to expect from you, to be able to look out for you and reach out to as a result of what's been discussed here.
Well, I mean, anybody that's just trying to change their life and feels like they don't know, they don't have the support that they need, or, they don't know the direction to go. A lot of people come to me saying that they've tried everything to lose weight or to get to where they want to be, and I'm their last stop kind of thing. They don't know what else to do. And
right.
I mean, I have started a YouTube channel this year. I'm hopefully going down to LA next month to shoot new programs that will be, I guess, more available for everybody. Right now, custom coaching is very expensive, but that's essentially what I do for the most part. So I'm going to start to try to come up with more programs that are more, I guess, affordable for people to use without having to, break the bank and get custom coaching and all this kind of stuff. So, I mean, just keep following, my Instagram's usually where everything gets promoted for the most part. I was advised by my, by business managers this year to open up a TikTok and to open up a Snapchat and to open up a Twitter. So now I have all these different platforms, but the one that is, I guess, that where everything started was Instagram. So everything that I have going on will just be shared on there. And I'm not into like selling people on anything, but anything that I really got going on will be through there. And just like any kind of support is amazing.
Okay. Well, on that note, I want to say thank you so much for giving me the time to speak with me, because again, we've already determined beforehand that you are a very busy person. So for you to give me an hour and a half that we've spoken here so far, it does mean a lot to me. And I appreciate you giving that time to discuss with me on the various things we got into here. So for the cameras, I want to say thank you to you, and I wish you nothing but the greatest success in your future endeavors here. And until next time, cheers to you.
Thank you.
Okay.